Hi, I'm Adam Yamaguchi, executive producer of Vanguard. Thanks for joining us on this very special show. The Vanguard unit here at Current TV was established with a singular mission: to shine the light in dark places and investigate stories that aren't being told. Our teams had regularly braved war zones, political turmoil, and rugged physical conditions, all in pursuit of the story. But in 2009, we became the story. Now, no journalist ever wants to overshadow the very story they set out to tell, but that's what happened to three of our own in March of 2009. Correspondent Laura Ling, producers Euna Lee and Mitch Koss traveled to South Korea and China to report on the trafficking of North Koreans. This project didn't seem particularly troublesome, in part because we were taking precautions, and because there weren't any major risks needed in order to tell the story. We'd later find out that things can quickly change out on the field. As you know, Laura and Euna are safe and back home. Till now, neither have been ready to talk about their ordeal. But in this next half hour, Laura shares her experiences with Vanguard correspondent Mariana Van Zeller, who went to Laura's home to sit down and discuss what happened.
Laura, you were my boss for 4 years, my colleague, and you're also my dear, dear friend. And now we are both pregnant, and we're sharing this very important moment of our lives together. So thank you so much for bringing us to your house and agreeing to do this interview.
Of course.
First question, starting from the beginning, what was the story you set out to do?
The story we set out to do involved looking at North Korean defectors. This is a country that is the most isolated totalitarian country in the world where starvation is rampant. So people are fleeing across the border to China. But once they get across to China, they're preyed on by traffickers who are exploiting these defectors, many of whom are women. Women are being forced into marriages, sold into marriages, lured into the prostitution industry. It's a humanitarian crisis that's taking place on the border of North Korea and China that neither country wants the world to know about.
And when they do manage to escape, what is their journey like?
It's almost impossible for North Koreans to escape to the south. So instead, they have to go through the border with China, which, as we saw, is extremely porous. The Tumen River or the Yalu River that borders the two countries, that's where they're crossing into China. Now, I say it's extremely porous, but it doesn't mean it's not without risk. There are guards on either side of those borders as well, and people are risking their lives to swim across the rushing waters of the river where they often end up drowning, or walking across the frozen ice in the dark of night where, if you slip and fall or if you lose your way, you could end up freezing to death. So it is a very perilous journey to cross this river, but people are doing it to escape the conditions in North Korea.
This was a really challenging story from the start because there were all these identities that you had to protect and all these people that didn't want to be on camera. Can you tell me a little bit about that?
We interviewed one young woman who, when she was in North Korea, she was told by a smuggler, or they call them brokers as well, I can get you a job in the computer industry. So she's thinking that she will cross over into China and maybe do some clerical work of some sort. Well, she finds out that she is placed in a job working with computers, but it's in the internet sex industry, where she is made to chat with clients and undress for them online. China does not regard these defectors as refugees. So if they find them living there in China, they will send them back to North Korea, where they face certain punishment. They will be sent to prison, a labor camp, and face possible torture and even execution. So these people live in fear that they will be captured by the Chinese. That's why we had to be careful about how we film them. In China, we only filmed people from below their faces or their backs, and we only met them in locations that were unidentifiable or places that were far from where they actually lived.
So you went to South Korea and China. Did you have any intention of going to North Korea?
No. No, but we did go to the river because we wanted to film the area where these people are being trafficked across. We had hired a guide. As you know, as foreign journalists, when we go overseas, we hire local fixers, people who know the area, who have worked with media in the past, And in this case, we had hired a man who seemed very trustworthy and seemed very cautious up until this morning. We were filming on the ice, and the ice was frozen, so we were walking on the ice with no intention of going into North Korea. But of course, we knew that North Korea was on the other side of the river, and our guide continued to walk across the ice. He motioned for us to follow him, and we did. We ended up on the North Korean side. We instantly, at that point, said, we have to get back across to China. We cannot stay here any longer.
You did fully realize that you were doing something that was very risky at the time?
I was nervous, but I also knew that let's just leave. Let's just go back to the other side and continue on with our filming. And that's what we did. We walked back across to China. It was about halfway across the river when we heard and saw North Korean soldiers yelling and running across the river toward us. We just started to run across the ice back to China. Personally, I was hoping to get onto Chinese soil, continue to run, and hope that they would not pursue us. Once I turned around and saw that they were actually chasing us onto the soil, that's when I knew things were really, really bad. I felt my feet unable to run anymore, and I literally collapsed onto the ground, unable to take another step because that's how scared I was. So I'm looking across the DMZ, the Korean Demilitarized Zone. This is the most heavily armed border in the world.
Days before their capture in China, Laura and Euna filmed at the DMZ and interviewed defectors who had managed to escape to South Korea.
This message here was left by a North Korean defector who escaped here to South Korea, leaving his mom and family back in North Korea. And the message says, "I pray that I will see my beloved mom soon." A few miles on the North Korean side of the DMZ, it's even more fortified, and there's no way anyone from North Korea can escape south across the DMZ. So if they want to leave, they have to find another escape route.
And that escape route is on North Korea's northern border with China. This is the Tumen River, which also serves as the border between North Korea and China. This is one of the escape hatches where North Koreans flee from a life of dire poverty and total repression. And it was here on the Tumen River where Laura Ling and Euna Lee were captured by North Korean soldiers. The other producer, Mitch Koss, managed to escape and get word to the US consulate in China, who then contacted me. I informed Laura and Euna's families, but at that moment, we all knew nothing more than the fact the two had been captured, and it would be days before we would learn anything else.
So they grabbed you? What happened exactly?
They surrounded us. They had their rifles pointed at us. We were both on the ground, apologizing, and they were determined to take us back to North Korea. The soldier that was upon me was particularly fierce. He kicked me in the face and the shoulder, and then grabbed my hand, started pulling me onto the ice. I tried to make the weight of my body very heavy so that it would be difficult for him to drag me across. And I continued to yell, hoping that perhaps Chinese soldiers might hear us and intervene. And I think that made him even more upset. He kicked me again, and then he raised his rifle, the butt of his rifle, and struck me in the head. And I blacked out after that.
When you came to yourself, where were you?
When I finally came to, I don't know if I was unconscious or if I was just delirious, because I was walking when I came to. Euna was in front of me with a soldier, and we were entering a tunnel. Honestly, I just felt like I had just been transported into another world, a nightmare of a world.
So when you realized that you were being taken, that you were now in North Korea, what was your first thought?
I was in a country that considers the United States its arch enemy. I didn't speak the language, and I had no idea if or when I would ever communicate with my family or friends again. Honestly, I didn't know if I would live. I didn't know that if I would be alive the following day. I was placed in a compound, which I had a decent-sized room with a bed and a bathroom and 2 guards that stayed in an adjoining room, always able to watch over me.
What did you eat?
The food was basic. I was fed 3 meals a day, very small portions, a bowl of rice, a small bowl of vegetables, maybe a little piece of fish.
Tell me some of what you did to cope with being there. Exercise, or what helped you?
Every second seemed like an eternity, especially at the beginning. But I learned to cope, and I learned to do things to center my mind so that I wasn't always focusing on what could be the worst. I meditated daily. I walked circles in my room. I thought about my friends like you and my family.
At one point, we learned that we could actually all write letters to you. How was it for you to read some of these letters?
It was amazing. I memorized the letters. I read them over and over and over, and they were, I think, the single most important thing that kept me going throughout the whole experience.
Ian, your husband, wrote every single day.
Ian wrote twice a day, in fact. He would type out a letter, and then he would handwrite a letter so that I could see his writing. And I would get them in batches. I would get the letters maybe once every week or 2 or 3. So each envelope might contain, a dozen or so letters. And yeah, he really poured his heart out to me in his letters. It was devastating for me to think that my whole life with my husband would be gone. I was devastated.
The weeks turned to very difficult months for all of us here at Current. In the Vanguard office, our colleagues and friends' desks would sit empty and remind us of the frightening ordeal Laura and Euna were facing inside the most isolated nation in the world. During this nearly 5-month-long ordeal, Current TV maintained a strict policy of silence. This policy was very controversial. Many questioned it, including members of the Current TV staff. But our company's founders, Al Gore and Joel Hyatt, believed strongly the company's only objective was to get Laura and Euna home safely. They believed that maintaining silence was critical to that objective, and the State Department agreed. Some criticized Al and Joel for their public silence, but they held fast to the belief that their obligation was not to the critics, but to Laura, Euna, and their families.
How did you learn there was going to be a trial?
Well, I had gone through an interrogation process that lasted several weeks where I had been grilled day after day about my profession, what job we were doing, and so on and so forth. Toward the end of that investigation, I was told that we would be going to trial.
How was the actual day of the trial?
I knew that there would be no presumption of innocence at this trial. The trial lasted, over the course of 3 days, it lasted about 6 to 8 hours. At the end of the trial, I was asked to sit down while the judge and his associates deliberated on the case, which lasted a total of 5 minutes.
But you hadn't seen Euna. The whole 5 months that you were in captivity, you didn't see Euna.
I saw her at the trial very briefly. It was amazing, as brief as it was. It was amazing to know that she was alive, to know that she was well. We didn't speak to each other. We were too nervous to speak to each other. We barely looked at each other.
Were you able to touch her?
I did. I was able to, when they actually handed down the sentence, I thought that I might never see her again, actually. And I knew that it might be my last chance to see her. So I just embraced her and just hugged her. And we were both there shaking. And that was the last time I saw her before we ended up coming home.
And when you found out that you were sentenced to 12 years?
The judge issued the sentence, and it was interpreted. Hearing those words, 12 years, I tried to prepare myself in the days leading up to the trial that it could be a lengthy sentence, but just hearing those words, I could barely stand up. It was when the judge said no forgiveness and no appeal that really cut into me, because I had all along been hoping that there could be a possibility of an appeal of some sort. I didn't know if the window of opportunity had closed and they had decided that this is it. So that was extremely hard, and after the trial, I spiraled into deep depression. I started refusing my meals and just kind of retreated to a dark corner of the room. and had to be faced with the thought of spending more than a decade in a North Korean labor camp.
Here, there was all this negotiation going on. Did you know that there was negotiations going on at all?
I did. I knew through the letters. I had also conveyed the message that it was President Clinton who was wanted by the North Korean government and needed to secure our release.
How did you know that he was the one they wanted to negotiate this?
It was like deciphering a puzzle, really. The North Koreans have a very indirect way of communicating, and nothing was spelled out. But it was almost like I had to figure out what they wanted. And eventually, I figured out that it was President Clinton.
And then he came to bring you guys back home. How was that day? What was it like when you first saw him?
I had gone from one of my lowest times in captivity. I was very sick before he came, to really one of the highest highs when I learned that I would be meeting with an envoy who had come from the United States. Euna and I were taken to a hotel, and we were led down a corridor full of North Korean Secret Service and into a room where standing before us was the former leader of the free world, 42nd President of the United States, standing there. It was unbelievable. I felt like he was a guardian angel that had come to our rescue.
What was it like when you actually did get into that plane with Bill Clinton?
We were talking about the former President of the United States traveling halfway around the world to North Korea to come to our rescue. It was completely surreal and amazing. I started to feel freedom come over me.
I knew I should put makeup on.
So now you've been back for 9 months. How has it been? You've done a lot of things. You've gotten pregnant.
It's been amazing. Every day, I appreciate the fact that I'm here every single day. Of course, it was a little bit hard to adjust when I first got back. And now things are really wonderful. I mean, I'm expecting a child and just spending lots of time with family and friends.
And you wrote a book.
Written a book, which was very, very cathartic and important for me to write from a healing perspective. I felt very uncomfortable when I came back with this attention being placed on us and not this issue. And I would like to use my voice to raise greater awareness about this humanitarian crisis.
You're not with Current anymore, but is journalism still in the cards for you?
I think so. I mean, I miss you guys dearly, and Vanguard is a huge part of my heart, and I regard you guys as my family and still talk to you almost every day.
And we miss you dearly too.
Yeah, and right now I'm focusing on this and having the baby, and I definitely want to continue to raise awareness about issues that I think people need to know about. So absolutely, it'll just be a matter of when and in what forum.
Laura Ling's producing partner Euna Lee was an instrumental part of our 3-person reporting team in China. As a South Korean American, Euna had extensive knowledge of and a passion to report on the cross-border trafficking from North Korea. She'd spent a few months setting up the story from home and lined up contacts that would arrange for interviews with defectors. I'm in touch with her pretty regularly, but Euna was not ready to speak on camera. She did want to share some thoughts with us. I want to start off by saying how grateful I am to all of you for your love and support. I received so much from you, and I hope that the positive energy will also reach the North Korean defectors and their lives. Laura and I are lucky we got to get our freedom back, but North Korean defectors are still living with an unknown future. As for myself, I'm enjoying the time with my family. Hearing my daughter call me mommy, even for the mundane things, brings such delight to my heart. And Laura is due any day now and has just co-written a book with her sister Lisa called Somewhere Inside. And all of us at Vanguard want to thank Current's chairman, Al Gore, for his tireless, devoted efforts throughout this ordeal to do anything possible and everything necessary to bring Laura and Euna home safely. Joel Hyatt announced to the company's staff on the day their capture was made public that we will bring them home, and fortunately, they are now home, safe and sound.
To all of the people who supported Euna and me throughout the nearly 5 months that we were in captivity, we wanted to thank you from the bottom of our hearts.
All the letters and postcards you sent us gave us strength to endure the difficult time we spent in North Korea.